There's a kind of silence that doesn't bring peace, a heavy silence, not born from calm but from what has been lost. Maybe you're living through that very moment right now, that strange place where everything outside keeps moving, but something inside has shut down. The world goes on, the hours pass, people speak, but inside you, time has stopped. It's not just about an external event. It's not just the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, unexpected news, or an empty bank account. True chaos rarely starts outside. It begins within. When something inside breaks and the question arises, now what? Who am I? This kind of collapse is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself. It simply steals the meaning from things. Suddenly, you find yourself trying to move on, but your soul feels hollow. It's like walking down familiar streets, saying familiar words, but everything sounds strange, distant, unreal. That's when most people try to move forward, act, plan, push ahead. But how do you rebuild when even the will to exist feels like it's crumbled? Napoleon Hill spoke of this moment of collapse as the vacuum state, that point where everything seems lost, when darkness swallows all hope. But according to him, it's exactly in that vacuum where a new mental image can be planted. The darkest hour of the night, he said, comes just before the dawn. Chaos, then, isn't just the end. It's the sacred pause in which all that was untrue within you loses power, so that something more honest can begin to emerge. Greg Braden, in his work on the coherence between the heart and the brain, uncovered something deeply healing. The human heart emits an electromagnetic field stronger than the brain's, and that field doesn't just respond to emotion, it instructs reality. It sends vibrational messages to the universe, shaped by the decisions we make in silence. This means that even in collapse, even when you have no answers, no direction, no strength, if your heart aligns with a quiet decision to rebuild, the universe listens, not to your screams, but to the steady pulse of someone who, even in ruins, decides to rise again. Perhaps you've never thought about it, but rebuilding a life after chaos is like reconstructing a city after an earthquake. Before the walls go up, the foundations must be examined. What still holds? What has rotted from within? The same is true for the mind. The same is true for the heart. This isn't about becoming who you were. It's about realizing that you never truly were. And maybe, just maybe, that's a hidden gift in the shape of pain. This video is not about formulas. It's not about forced optimism. It's about revealing the forgotten law, the one that doesn't rebuild lives through blind effort, but through vibrational wisdom, through emotional clarity, through the silent faith of someone who looks at their own wreckage and, even trembling, decides to plant something new there. Because yes, right there, on that cracked and broken ground, is the exact soil where life wants to begin again. And maybe, in a way you never imagined, there is a moment when everything goes quiet inside. Not a peaceful silence, but an absence of answers, of direction, of meaning. Maybe you've reached that point. Maybe you're there now, where no word soothes, no advice feels real, and even your own inner voice becomes a distant echo. It's like walking inside yourself with no map, no coordinates, just the weight of a life that seems to have lost its compass. That moment when everything fails, inside and out, is paradoxically the most fertile of all. But almost no one sees it, because it hurts, because fear is loud, because memory repeats. You won't make it. And in that invisible field, there's a subtle danger, the urge to fix it too quickly, to act before feeling, to plan before listening. But what's collapsing isn't just a project or a relationship. It's a vibrational structure that no longer holds your inner truth. Napoleon Hill said that every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. But most people don't see the seed because emotional blindness has set in. And yet, that seed is always there. Chaos does not destroy you. It only destroys what no longer supported your truth. Maybe you've clung to an old version of yourself, a version that learned to survive, to please, to control. But collapse comes when that image no longer fits. And yes, that hurts, because it kept you going for a while, it kept you safe. But now, it must be released. The emptiness you feel isn't a lack of life. It's space being cleared for something more authentic to grow. And that space, that void, is sacred, even if it still feels like nothing but cold, hard ground. What few people realize is that this space between what has fallen and what has yet to be born is exactly where new vibrational seeds can be planted. Not with haste, not with fear, with reverence, with presence, with listening. This is the ground where your soul finally finds enough silence to whisper, "Now I can show you who you really are." There is a quiet intelligence that holds the universe together, a subtle law that most don't perceive, but which governs everything that lives, feels, and vibrates, the law of polarity. Napoleon Hill understood this law not just as a philosophical idea, but as an active principle of transformation. For him, every loss carries invisibly a hidden gain, every pain, a hidden power, every fall, a secret impulse to rise. The problem isn't the absence of this force. The problem is our inability to recognize it while standing in the rubble. In the midst of chaos, the heart contracts, the mind closes, vision narrows, and in this survival state, it's almost impossible to perceive possibility. But polarity doesn't stop acting just because you can't see it. The entire universe moves in complementary pairs, shadow and light, winter and spring, death and rebirth. The collapse you experienced is only one side of the coin, and if there is destruction, there is also creation, waiting quietly to emerge. Greg Braden, in his studies of energy fields and the physics of consciousness, affirms that collapse never comes alone. It always opens a new field of possibility, always. In practical terms, this means that while part of you is crying out for answers, another part, quieter, hidden, is trying to show you a new vibrational path. But to access it, you have to shift your focus. Step out of the repetition of fear and feel deeply. The greater the fall, the greater the potential for expansion. Not as a motivational phrase, but as a vibrational truth. Because there are forces that only reveal themselves once all that is false has been stripped away. And that cannot happen while you're still clinging to the old self. Chaos, in reality, is a revealer. It breaks down what you thought you were so it can reveal what you truly are. And within that space, between what collapsed and what can now rise, polarity is working silently. Rebuilding is not starting over from zero. It's not retracing your steps with more effort. It's tuning into a frequency that was always there, but could only now be lived. Because only now are you vulnerable enough to release the pride, to release the control, to allow the universe to show you a force you could never have accessed if everything had gone according to plan. A force born of the invisible, one that transforms everything, from the center outward. There is a reflex that often delays true healing, the urgency to move. When something within us collapses, our first instinct is to act, to fix, to do something, anything that distracts from the pain or gives us back a sense of control. But this rush, though understandable, often leads us away from what really matters, because it's not outer movement that rebuilds a life, it's the internal vibration that sustains new movement. And without that realignment, every effort becomes repetition, every action becomes noise. Neuroscience confirms that a brain under intense stress cannot create. It can only react. It doesn't build the new, it relives the old. In times of crisis, the nervous system enters survival mode, and in that mode, everything you do is infused with the very fear you're trying to avoid. What looks like action is often just disguised avoidance. The body trying to speed up so it doesn't have to feel. The mind trying to stay busy so it doesn't have to listen. Joe Dispenza teaches that the body becomes addicted to emotions from the past, and when this addiction goes unrecognized, even our new plans become old patterns. The person thinks they're changing, believes they're heading in a new direction, but deep down, they're recreating the same story, just with different characters, because the foundational energy, the dominant emotion, is still the same. And unless that emotional matrix is transformed, any attempt to rebuild will be a repetition of what no longer serves. That's why the true restart begins in silence, in the pause, in the courage to do nothing for a moment, just to feel what still pulses, to recognize what must be left behind, to notice which decisions are born of clarity and which are driven by fear. Because there's a profound difference between acting with purpose and moving from impulse. A difference that may not be visible from the outside, but changes everything within. Rebuilding a life doesn't begin with a plan. It begins with presence, with the realignment of internal frequency, with the quiet decision not to repeat yourself, Because when your vibration shifts, reality responds. And then, every action that follows is no longer a cry of fear. It's the natural extension of your new truth. A truth that doesn't need to rush, doesn't need to prove. It only needs to exist, clearly, fully, one choice at a time. There is a force that transforms destinies, that moves invisible worlds, that reshapes entire realities without needing external proof. That force is faith, but not the loud kind, not the pleading kind, not the kind that demands immediate signs. It's the kind of faith that remains quiet, the kind that holds a mental image with such inner conviction that the universe has no choice but to respond. Napoleon Hill saw this not as belief in the abstract, but as a practical, energetic law. Everything begins with a burning desire, sustained by faith, not by urgency, not by desperation, but by a vibrational certainty that doesn't depend on what the eyes can see. Most people think faith is about asking hard, insisting, repeating, but that's often not faith. That's fear, disguised as devotion. Real faith is silent because it trusts, because it already feels what hasn't yet manifested, because it knows the invisible must be felt as real before it can be seen. This is one of the most powerful reversals chaos invites us to learn. First you feel it, then you see it. First you believe, then it happens, not the other way around. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that faith acts like a silent magnet. You don't manifest what you beg for in anxiety, you manifest what you expect in peace, and that expectation isn't passive. It's an active, vibrational stance. It generates reality. It shapes circumstance. It attracts without force. Because the universe doesn't respond to the number of your words. It responds to the quality of your vibration. And that vibration is born from a mental image you choose to hold, even in the dark, even in pain, even when everything looks lost. Chaos, as cruel as it may seem, serves a function that often goes unnoticed. It destroys the outer noise. It silences the false paths. It turns off the voices of the world so you can finally hear the only one that matters, your soul's. And it's in that silence, often brought on by pain, that new creation begins. Not with shouting, not with planning, but with an image, a quiet, felt, protected image inside. One that no one else sees, but you know is real, because it pulses, because it vibrates, because it already exists, even without form, inside your creative field. That is the beginning of true transformation. When, even without guarantees, you hold what hasn't yet been born, when you protect this new vision like a seed in fertile soil, and even without signs, without applause, without certainty, you insist on feeling it as real. That's when the invisible law starts working. That's when reality starts to reshape itself, not by the fear you carry, but by the image you choose to inhabit, in silence, in truth, in faith. There's a subtle anxiety that settles in when we stand at the edge of something new. It's as if the mind, still shaken from collapse, tries to find safety in details, planning each step, controlling every outcome, anticipating all possibilities. But control, while it may look like prudence, is often just fear dressed up as order. And this fear, disguised as logic, convinces us that we must know exactly how things will unfold before we can trust them. When, in truth, the universe asks the opposite, to trust even without knowing. Napoleon Hill emphasized the importance of a clear goal, but he also warned against defining the path through the ego's limited vision. According to him, we must be firm about the what we want to feel, live, create, and surrender the how to infinite intelligence. Because when we try to control every move, we operate from the limits of the rational mind. And that mind, no matter how trained, cannot see the full picture. It only sees what it has already lived, which is why it tends to repeat, limit, sabotage. The subconscious, on the other hand, responds to dominant emotion. It doesn't need roadmaps. It needs vibrational coherence. If your vibration is soaked in doubt, scarcity, fear of failing, that's the frequency the subconscious will amplify, even if your plans are well written, even if your words are positive. The universe doesn't answer what you say. It answers what you vibrate. And what you vibrate is a direct result of the emotion you choose, especially when no one is watching. That's why real reconstruction doesn't start with lists. It starts with surrender, not with control but with presence. When you focus on the vibrational state of the destination, on the feeling of already being there, already living what you desire, something inside you shifts. And that quiet shift changes everything around you. The right people show up, opportunities arise, doors open without forced effort, not because you pushed them, but because you aligned. The mind that tries to control is bound by fear. The soul that trusts opens to miracles. And those miracles have no schedule, no shape, no predictable logic. They happen when you release the how and begin to live from the already is. When you feel the new reality before it appears. When you stop demanding proof and start being the evidence. And in that space of letting go, you become the precise channel through which the new can finally arrive. There are moments when collapse leaves us so scattered, so fractured, that even the thought of rebuilding feels distant, almost impossible. But there is a silent point where everything can begin to reorganize, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Real transformation doesn't happen in one day. It happens in layers, in small gestures, in invisible choices, repeated until they generate a new frequency. And it's in that vibrational repetition that the law of rhythm, described by Napoleon Hill, begins to act. One step at a time, one day after the next, like someone building a bridge over still turbulent waters of the soul. The first step in this reconstruction begins with an act of courage, identifying which emotion took over during your chaos. Was it anger, abandonment, guilt, powerlessness, sadness, fear? It doesn't matter what it was. What matters is naming it honestly. Because as long as it operates beneath the surface of your energy field without being seen, it continues to direct your choices. What remains unnamed governs in silence, and this first gesture, naming what hurt, is the doorway to a new frequency. The second step is a call to conscious imagination. Choose a mental image that represents the exact opposite of the emotional state you identified. If it was abandonment, see yourself embraced. If it was powerlessness, feel yourself creating. If it was anger, visualize calm. But don't just think it, feel it. For 11 minutes, in silence, without asking, without begging, just feel it as if it were real. That time isn't magical by itself, but it creates a new neural path, a new electromagnetic signature. And repeated daily, it begins to reprogram not just your mind, but your entire vibrational field. The third step is subtle but powerful. Throughout the day, make micro decisions that are aligned with the new image you're cultivating, even if they seem insignificant. A gesture of self-care, a calmer response, a higher thought. Each small act reinforces the new frequency. And over time, you begin to realize that you're not just imagining something new. You are becoming this new vibration. You are living from that state as someone who has finally come home after being lost in themselves. This process is not about changing the world in 3 steps. It's about transforming the field in which your world emerges. It's about planting roots in the unseen before any fruit appears. It's about trusting the power of conscious repetition, because it's in that repetition, done with presence, with truth, with emotion, that the new reality builds itself. Not spectacularly, but deeply. Not overnight, but through vibrational consistency. Until one day what was once a quiet image becomes the life pulsing around you, and everything begins to reflect the frequency you've chosen to hold. Some symbols don't belong only to mythology. They live within us. They grow in the unseen. They emerge during the hardest phases of life. And among all these archetypes, perhaps none represents the process of reconstruction as powerfully as the phoenix. Not because it simply rises again, but because it rises transformed. It rises with a new vibration, a new understanding, a new form. The phoenix does not return to what it was. It becomes what only fire could reveal. The chaos you faced was not a mistake. It wasn't a detour. It was a call to transformation. And that call, as painful as it may have been, brought you here, to the deepest of all choices, to keep trying to become who you were, rebuilding from the old, or to accept that a part of you is never coming back, and that this is not a loss but a rebirth. Napoleon Hill taught that true success only arrives once a new inner identity is formed. When you stop seeking results with the old mindset, when you stop repeating desires that no longer match your current truth, what chaos breaks is not just what was out of place, it breaks your identity. It dissolves the image you held of yourself. And that can be terrifying, because for a while you feel without ground, without a name, without structure. But it's also sacred, because in that interval, where you're no longer what you were and not yet what you'll become, something is revealed. Something that was hidden under the layers of the character you used to play. Something that could only emerge through pain, through stillness, through emptiness. Spirituality does not promise a life without collapse. It offers another perspective on it. The perspective that everything that burns inside you can, if welcomed with presence, become creative fire. The perspective that you cannot return to the old version, because it already served its purpose. It already gave you everything it could. And now something greater, something more aligned with your essential purpose, wants to be born. You are not just restarting. You are being remade from a more awakened consciousness, from a more honest gaze, from a pain that instead of hardening you, made you bloom from within. Chaos didn't take something from you. It revealed something you didn't know you had. Something that could not emerge if everything had remained as it was. And that something is your new vibrational truth, your new essence, your new way of being in the world. Just like the phoenix, you don't return to the beginning. You rise from the ashes, not carrying your wounds, but carrying the power of having survived the fire, and choosing, even in the middle of destruction, to trust that life still has something to show you, something that only reveals itself when you allow yourself to be reborn, not as you were, but as you never dared to imagine. Not everything that collapses is a failure. Not everything that ends is a loss. Sometimes what crumbles was exactly what could no longer sustain the truth of your soul. And as painful as it may have been to go through that collapse, perhaps it wasn't an ending after all, but a calling, a silent, deep calling for you to rebuild, not from fear, not from blind effort, but from vibrational clarity, from the inner knowing of someone who through the fall discovered their own center. Napoleon Hill reminded us that a mind dominated by faith and a clear mental image can move mountains. But that faith doesn't come from desperation. It comes from the inner decision to no longer doubt, to hold the vision of what is desired even when the senses say otherwise. Because external reality is only a reflection of dominant vibration. And when that vibration shifts, everything begins to reorganize. Bruce Lipton, through his work on epigenetics, revealed that our internal environment, our thoughts, emotions, beliefs, shapes even our biology. The body responds to the mind. Health responds to frequency. Life responds to the energetic field. This means your reconstruction isn't just emotional or symbolic. It's also physical, real, tangible. Each time you choose to vibrate a new image, you're not just recreating your destiny, you're also reshaping your body, your nervous system, your vital energy. That's why rebuilding isn't about fighting what fell, it's about accepting the collapse as part of the cycle, as a necessary chapter, as a portal. While you're focused on mourning what was lost, you can't see what's trying to be born, and the new only blossoms when you begin to raise something within that matches who you've become. Not who you were, not who they expected, but what now pulses with truth. So maybe you don't need to understand everything right now. Maybe there's still pain, still questions. But if there is even a flicker of a silent decision inside you, a decision to look at your own ruin with reverence, then something has already begun. Because there, in that exact place where everything seemed to end, is the beginning of a new reality. A reality that doesn't depend on the past, but on the frequency you choose to hold from this point forward. And what if the chaos that brought you here wasn't punishment, but a call to remember who you are, to recover what was never truly lost, only forgotten, a call to rebuild with consciousness, with faith, with truth, and above all, with love for everything you had the courage to let fall, because it was on that broken ground that your new life began to bloom, in silence, in presence, in you.